From the stunning vistas of Limbo, to the skylines of lust, down to the ancient ruins of wrath, the angels of heaven watched over the punishment of the sinners subjected to eternity in hell. Above them all was an archangel, whose might and devotion enforced God's will. But when V1, a machine of war, entered hell and its actions soaked every surface in blood, everything changed. What did this angel believe was his divine purpose? How did his actions impact the future of heaven and hell? Why did the Ferryman have this very intimate painting crafted of a moment between them? And how does his story end? In this video, we explore the lore and story behind the Supreme Archangel Gabriel in ULTRAKILL. It was from his throne in the highest reaches of heaven that God gazed upon all of his creation. He oversaw the mankind experiment, observing as mortals moved through their brief, fragile lives on the world below. To aid him in this vast design, God called into being the angels. Sustained by the holy light of the Father, these supreme angels moved through heaven and earth alike, serving as both messengers and enforcers of his divine law. Among these radiant beings stood the Archangel Gabriel, the ever-watchful sword of heaven, ready to act when the Father's will demanded it. In the ages that followed, lesser angels took shape from the souls of mortals who had walked lives of virtue. Unlike the higher angels, crafted by God in their full and perfect form, these lesser angels, known as virtues, emerged as abstract and animalistic shapes. This was a stark contrast to the regal, humanoid appearance of the angels in the higher ranks. With God in command and his angels carrying out his holy will, the ages passed beneath their gaze, yet in time, God grew restless, his great experiment stirring only frustration. Again and again, evil crept into his creation, and though he began the experiment anew countless times, the corruption always returned. He began to question his faith in creation itself, wondering if his perfect design had been flawed from the start. He had granted mankind the gift of free will, but they squandered it on vanity and sin. They did not follow his rule, his word, his law. In a moment of wrath and weary defeat, God forged a place where the sinful would be cast down, a realm for the damned where eternity itself became a ceaseless cycle of torture and suffering. It was when one of God's brightest and most beautiful angels, Lucifer, rose to question him, asking why he had condemned mortal souls to eternal torment, that the Almighty felt terror for the first time. Lucifer asked if never-ending torture was truly a fate fit for a fool. As this terror swelled within him, he cast Lucifer down into the infernal den. Over time, God fell deep into the depths of despair, mortified by what he had done to his creations and by what he had brought into being. As for Gabriel, every trial he would face, every act he would carry out would be forged in the fires of this place. Hell. From the black depths of divine wrath, hell was wrought into existence. 9 distinct layers took shape, each a prison crafted for the weight of mortal sin. Limbo, lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, heresy, violence, fraud, and treachery. 9 descending realms, each darker and more twisted than the last. In each, the damned would suffer their fitting punishment for all eternity. When cast down, each soul was swept into the black waters of the river Styx, where the ferrymen carried them to the destined lair. The ferrymen themselves have an entire history and story of their own, but this is not their tale. They had once been mortals, virtuous enough to escape damnation, yet not pure enough to enter heaven. Granted a holy cloth that they wore, the Ferrymen carried out the Father's divine will. Each circle of hell was likely ruled by a leader, each bearing a title of power and the weight of their own domain. One such ruler was King Minos of the Lust Layer, appointed as the Judge of Hell. He was the one who delivered judgment to the passing souls when they confessed their sins to him. To ensure every soul met its punishment without fail, angels entered this realm as the Father's unyielding enforcers, carrying out his law and his sentence upon the damned. With heaven, hell, and the rules of this world established, we can return to the focus of this story. The Archangel Gabriel was the most respected and the most feared of God's enforcers, and this was for good reason. His faith in God was absolute, and his purpose was whatever task the Father placed upon him. Angels themselves were created without gender, mere instruments of the Father's will. In heaven, however, those addressed with masculine pronouns were seen as closer to God, for he too was spoken of in such terms. Thus, Gabriel was spoken of as he by both angels and the few mortals who encountered him. Like the other higher angels, Gabriel was offered wings, gleaming silver armor, and a helmet marked with the sign of a golden cross, a symbol of his role and of his faith. The Archangel Gabriel was a force of celestial fury, cutting down all who defied the word of God when commanded. Wielding the holy light and skilled with every weapon in existence, Gabriel could summon weapons forged from that light. Each was crafted for a specific purpose. Axes, spears, greatswords, and katanas served among his arsenal. By his side, however, were two swords, Justice and Splendor. Justice embodied the Father's law, while Splendor reflected his glory. Together, they served as a reminder that divine judgment was as radiant as it was absolute. Gabriel's devotion was absolute, but the events to come would put it to the test. For a time, God watched as the sinners of mankind entered hell and endured eternal torment across the layers, yet his guilt grew even stronger. Nothing remained but hatred, born of the infinite pain he had inflicted. He felt regret and a hollow emptiness, and he began to seek the end of days. When he stared into the abyss he had created, the abyss averted its gaze. God had seen his own capacity for cruelty and was horrified by his reflection. Then, he left. The disappearance of God shattered the balance of the cosmic order. Both heaven and hell were thrown into upheaval, forced to change in the wake of his absence. The angels abandoned their posts in hell and returned to heaven, seeking to decide what should be done in the chaos. Without his law to bind them, old ambitions and new rebellions began to stir. Without God's law and the oversight of angels, some of hell's rulers moved to reshape their domains. King Minos, the judge of hell, looked upon his domain, the second layer of lust. He had long believed that eternal suffering was an unjust punishment for those whose only sin had been to love. Freed from the holy enforcement of the angels, he began the Lust Renaissance. As the angels struggled to contain the chaos in heaven, Lust transformed into a thriving city. Towering structures arose for its people to live and enjoy, free from pain and torment. It became a place of peace and love, probably a lot of love. We all know what was going on there. 2 layers down in greed, however, King Sisyphus heard of Minos' peaceful revolution, and he did not believe such a path could bring real change. To him, the only path to freedom from the angels' cruel reign was through open battle. He offered the sinners of his lair freedom if they would join the army he would lead. He trained them, winning their loyalty with charisma, fiery speeches, and relentless drive. Together, this army of husks drilled and prepared for the day the angels would return from heaven. In life, King Sisyphus had been known for his cunning, deception, and defiance, the perfect leader for what would come to be known as the Sisyphean Insurrection. Meanwhile, amidst the chaos in heaven, a group of angels came together to form the Council. Seizing heaven's highest authority, the Council declared that they, as a body, would enforce God's will despite his absence. As they looked down towards hell during their destruction, they called upon their brightest and strongest angel to restore order, Gabriel. As heaven's enforcer, Gabriel was ordered by the council to restore hell to its intended purpose, the suffering of those who had sinned. The archangel did not question the order. His entire identity, his very sense of self, was bound to how he could serve the will of God. When the council declared that their command reflected the same will, he obeyed without question, and so he left heaven for hell. When the angel reached Lust, he did not see a haven for those King Minos deemed unworthy of punishment. He saw a city that had defied God's law. This realm had been made for retribution, and in Gabriel's view, it had to return to that. King Minos, the judge of hell's actions, had gone against the very purpose for which hell had been created. When Gabriel entered his realm, Minos refused to fight him. He tried to reason with the archangel, but Gabriel's orders were clear. Blinded by divine duty, Gabriel ignored the king's pleas and struck him down. His flesh was torn asunder, torrents of crimson pooling at his feet. As they watched this, the people of Lust cried out, but it was already too late. He then turned to them and declared, "The Lord's will be done." And as Minos' massive body lay against the backdrop of the city, with order restored, the council commanded that King Minos' soul, which was powerful and risked becoming a prime soul, a being of immense strength, be secured. So it was imprisoned, and Minos watched as his lifeless body was overtaken by the parasites of the city he had tried to save. In time, parts of Lust crumbled as the parasites used his body as their host. For his actions during the brief battle for Lust, Gabriel was granted the title Judge of Hell by the Council, a mantle left vacant by Minos' fall. This archangel was unmatched in combat, never struggled, and mindlessly obeyed the council's orders without question. His next command was to stop the Sisyphean insurrection so that the angels could return to greed. King Sisyphus had commanded his army with such charisma and drive that these mere husks, the lowest in hell's hierarchy, believed they could take on an angel. When Gabriel arrived, he unsheathed justice and splendor for the first time since time immemorial, beheaded Sisyphus, and displayed the severed head for all to see. In that moment, the will to fight drained from the army. The archangel knew he did not have to fight. Shattering the army's morale was enough to break the insurrection, but it was not good enough for Gabriel. Before he left, he cut every insurrectionist apart, keeping them alive just enough to endure their punishments. With the council now ruling heaven and the revolutions in lust and greed crushed, a new order was restored. The angels then returned to hell's layers to watch over the sinners. Gabriel, ever the Father's blade, waited for his next command from the council, ready to carry out what he believed was God's will. To the population of heaven, the Archangel Gabriel was idolized as an enforcer, a living blade of the holy realm. He was kind, loving, and fair to those who followed the council's orders. Even among the souls dragged to hell, those who accepted their punishment saw him as a divine light, one who could help them. One such soul was Hank, a human who had been sent to the first layer of Limbo. This circle was fascinating. It was a realm for souls who had not sinned, yet had not followed God in their mortal lives. Because of this, Limbo was designed as a place apart, cut off from God's divine grace, serving as a quiet punishment for the faithless. It was a false paradise with hollow walls that screamed at the touch, vistas that were only illusions, and a mocking song that looped endlessly through speakers across the realm. Hank hated Limbo and attempted to befriend Gabriel, hoping that through worship of the angel, he might be carried into heaven. But Gabriel, ever focused on his duty to serve God's divine plan, never fulfilled Hank's wish. Even when Hank traveled deeper into Limbo and prayed at what was essentially a shrine to the Archangel, his wish went unanswered. In the greatest upheaval since the disappearance of God, the final war on Earth sent an overwhelming influx of souls into hell. On the fifth layer, a ferryman watched as the river Styx swelled and spilled out into an ocean. A calamity had struck the mortal world, and he struggled to manage the millions of souls pouring in each day. Each cried out, begging for mercy and safe passage. Then the flood intensified as billions of souls poured through, minute by minute. The ferryman tried to keep pace, collecting coins from those who offered them, but in the chaos, he slipped into the tides. Suddenly, a light as brilliant as the Lord himself shone, and mighty arms lifted the ferryman from the darkness, holding him with compassion and warmth. Gabriel had seen how devoted this sinner was to God. He healed his wounds and then left. For Gabriel, it was simply another moment in hell, another act to keep the divine order in balance. For the ferryman, it was a rare, treasured encounter with the angel. He immortalized the moment in a painting, placing it where he could see it from his vessel. As mankind dwindled into extinction after events still unknown to us following the final war, the ferryman hoped that, with no more souls to guide, they would be granted entry to heaven as a reward for their service. That day never came. The fall of mankind marked the end of God's experiment. With no mortal souls left to guide, the angels turned their gaze inward, to heaven above and to the eternal sentences still grinding on in hell below. As much as I want to, I cannot go into the whole final war and beyond in this video, but during it, humanity had developed machines fueled by blood to fight the war for them. After mankind's extinction, many of these machines poured into hell through a gate uncovered during the Hell expeditions. One of these robots was a V1. Gabriel loathed the machines that had defiled hell's depths. Street cleaners purified what they saw, guttermen fired upon all, and drones explored the layers. These were just three among many, each drawn here by its own grim purpose. To the Archangel, they were a blight upon this damned realm. The V1 that crossed into hell was unlike the others. Forged in the war's final days, it had never truly tasted battle. Versatile by design, it could wield a vast array of weapons. Built to upgrade itself when needed, it descended through hell's mouth, limbo, lust, and gluttony, leaving nothing alive in its path, taking the blood that flowed within both machine and the beast. Gabriel, who had watched the machine slaughter the denizens of hell's higher layers, would not allow it to go any further. Such acts were an affront to the sacred law of God, and the Archangel would not see them go unanswered. He commanded the intruder to turn back, warning that this realm was not for its kind. Still, V1 moved forward, undeterred. It was a genuine offer from the Archangel, a final chance for the machine to leave, but as it entered the heart chamber, the gateway to greed, he was forced to act. Just as he had done many times before, Gabriel invoked his divine judgment, now tested by the machine. He resolved to render it inanimate once more. In that arena of flesh, the Supreme Angel and the machine clashed, but this encounter was different. Gabriel summoned weapons of light, struck from every angle, and gave the conflict everything he had, but V1 overcame him. The Judge of Hell was not only angered by his defeat, he was humiliated and disgraced that a machine could overcome him. As V1 descended into greed, Gabriel returned to heaven and reported his failure to secure hell against the machine invasion. Despite his blind obedience to their word, the council saw his wounds of body and soul, yet did not ask about his well-being. Instead, they asked if he had abandoned the way of their creator. Gabriel had existed for one purpose: to serve the will of God. For ages beyond mortal measure, Gabriel had obeyed without hesitation, without question, and without doubt. Now, after a single failure, he stood before the council in disgrace. He begged for forgiveness, arguing that his devotion to their creator was absolute, and that he had never strayed from the will of the Father. But by his defeat, the council argued, Gabriel had implied that the might of the Father could be shaken by mere objects. They called his words impossible, heresy, unspeakable, and they silenced him. Then came their judgment. As punishment for his failure, and for the implication that a machine could shake the might of the Father, they stripped the Father's light from his body. He was told that within 24 hours, the last embers of this light would fade, and with them, so would Gabriel. But if he could prove his loyalty by tearing apart the machine, redemption could still be offered. As the divine light began to fade, he screamed a prayer to God, remaining faithful while raging against the machine. In doing so, he was stripped of the title Judge of Hell and became Gabriel, the Apostate of Hate. With 24 hours to appease the council and his holy light fading with every passing moment, Gabriel descended into hell. He saw the carnage left in the machine's wake, the streets drowned in blood, its hunger unending. From limbo to lust, from gluttony to greed, through wrath and at last heresy, V1 had left nothing but ruin. Gabriel noticed its arrival in heresy at once. He smelled the insolent stench of the machine's bloodstained hands and commanded the machine come to him. Deep within heresy, in a chapel, the Archangel played the organ. In perfect, simmering rage, he waited for the machine he believed had taken all from him. When the machine crossed the chapel's threshold, Gabriel's voice thundered with the weight of his hatred, not only for what it was, but for all it had done. He swore to cut it down, to break it apart, and to scatter the wreckage of its profane form across the stars, to grind it into nothing until even the sparks at its heart screamed for mercy. Limbo, lust, and the layers above heresy had fallen beneath its hunger. It needed to be ended. With all that remained of his strength, Gabriel, the Apostate of Hate, gave himself wholly to his fury. Light blazed from his weapons, his strikes falling like the judgment of heaven itself. As the battle raged within that chapel of flesh and stone, he was struck by a realization. For the first time in an age beyond reckoning, the Archangel was facing a true challenge. He enjoyed this. But even with splendor and justice in hand, Gabriel could not overcome the machine. Twice it struck him down, and twice he rose, until at last he could rise no more. This time, there was no roar of anger at his defeat. Instead, there was relief. This was not failure. This was the taste of a battle worth fighting. Before vanishing from that ruined chapel, he promised the machine that they would meet again. Then, in a flare of fading light, Gabriel withdrew to the first circle of heaven, the moon, to be alone with his thoughts. The Supreme Archangel had clashed with the machine twice, as he sat upon the moon, gazing down at the husk of a fallen earth. He realized the fire that burned within him was not hatred, but passion. He had been created in the perfect form of an archangel, given the might to destroy any foe he encountered, yet he had never truly struggled. For all of his existence, he had simply done what he was commanded. Now, for the first time in the endless span of his existence, he felt the desire to overcome. Gabriel had found something he desired for himself. It was no command from God, no decree of the council, but a want born from within. He knew the end of hell had begun, for V1 was descending even deeper into its rotting heart. Then another realization struck him: guilt. In that rare moment of true silence and introspection, Gabriel considered the countless he had tormented and slain. They were beyond number, their suffering beyond measure, and to what end? And who had his actions really benefited? The world built on the supposed will of God lay in ruin, and only he remained to gather its broken pieces. But why rebuild when hell's law had never served any soul? It had only been cruelty. The council had pursued the fading light of God's fire in his absence, but their memory of his words and will had grown twisted and warped. The aimless masses of heaven had followed them into that corruption. The angels still acted in the Father's name, but his kingdom had become something unrecognizable. As Gabriel looked at his fire, he drew his blade and held it up to the dying light. He had been a weapon of heaven without a will of his own. Now, the blade he held was no longer guided by another's hand, but by his own. If the world was to change, it would require something drastic, for the angels would never heed mere words. So he returned to heaven. Through the great auditorium he walked, striking down the council one by one, their blood spilling across his blade and the marble beneath his feet. Before the last of the council, Gabriel paused. The figure begged him to stop, crying that this was heresy, murder, that they were the supreme authority. But to Gabriel, words meant nothing. No plea could call the angel's blade back to its sheath. The Archangel explained that after the chaos born of God's disappearance, the people of heaven followed the council only out of fear and desperation. But he, Gabriel, could show them there was nothing to fear. There was a better way. God was dead. The council claimed to serve his word, yet he was no longer there. In a final bid for survival, the last of the council warned that without him, Gabriel would never regain his connection to the Father's light, and within hours, he would be dead. Gabriel's blade swept through the counselor's neck. "I know," he said, for he had already accepted his fate. Lifting the severed head high, he offered his final message to the hosts of heaven, the angels watching from the gates of the auditorium. It was a message carried to the farthest reaches of the cosmos. It was not a cry for allegiance nor a plea for mercy. It was proof that the rulers of heaven could bleed and that their reign had ended. There was a better way than fear and cruelty. With it, Gabriel left heaven to endure his final few hours in hell. Gabriel began as the unyielding blade of heaven, forged in the Father's light to carry out his will without hesitation or question. Every judgment he passed, every life he ended was done in the name of a divine order he believed to be absolute. Even after God's disappearance, he served the council with the same blind devotion, believing their rule to be the continuation of the Father's law. To the hosts of heaven and the damned of hell, he was a figure of awe and fear, a symbol of celestial judgment. Defeat changed him. Facing the machine V1 broke the illusion of his invincibility, and with it, the certainty that his purpose had ever been his own. In the quiet that followed, passion replaced hatred and guilt began to take root. He saw the cruelty of his long service, the twisted state of heaven's rule, and the emptiness of laws upheld only by fear. The blade he once wielded for others now belonged to him alone, and with it, he chose to end the false order that had ruled in God's absence. Gabriel's final act was not to claim power, but to reject it entirely. He struck down the council, knowing it would cost him the last of his fading light, and left heaven behind. His message to the angels was not a call for allegiance, but proof that their rulers could bleed, and that there was a better way than fear and cruelty. In the final hours of his life, he returned to hell, not as God's enforcer, but as a free being who had chosen his own end. His life had been shaped by the will of others. His legacy was now defined by his own. The Archangel Gabriel's story is still not over. He had vowed to fight V1 one more time, and when it would eventually happen, he would enjoy every moment of it. I absolutely loved putting this entire video together. So many of you have requested that I cover ULTRAKILL for so long, and when I finally got around to playing it, I loved it. The story is incredible, so is the gameplay, and what I loved the most were the Easter eggs, secret levels, and references to other games. I have been drawn to religious storytelling lately, and when I realized that Dante's Inferno was a huge influence, I knew I would love this. Each layer of hell has a secret level, whether it is fishing, Power Wash Simulator with a hint of Luigi's Mansion, or The Witness. It scratches that problem-solving itch. I do not want to say what all the secret levels are because spoilers, and it is worth it to see what you get when you land in that secret level. ULTRAKILL is still in early access. We have up to Act 2 currently, and the previews for Fraud, the 8th layer, look incredible. The story is far from over, and I cannot wait to see what awaits us when we see Gabriel again, having come to realize he can select his own purpose. Each level is handcrafted with new textures, and if you watch the live streams of the dev team, you can see just how much love, effort, and care has been put into it. Those tiny little details about the Ferryman skulls, the different colours, the painting the Ferryman had, the first circle of heaven. This video was about Gabriel, but there were so many moments I could have talked about the final war, the purpose of each robot, the terminals that basically grade the machines fighting in hell. I had to pull back a lot with this, and trust me, there will be more content. This game is a gem. I will also say that I like the idea of a fallen angel stripped of the holy light fighting their way up through the circles of heaven. Each kill offers them holy light to sustain them. Just a thought I had. Anyway, that was everything I wanted to say, so if you enjoyed this video, then I would love you to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you did not, and let me know what you thought in the comments below. I would also like to thank my gold tier patrons and channel members: Queen Arby, Lewis, Orin X, Drakey Phoenix, Daniel Cal Drawings, 501st Clone Boy, Ruba Mendoza, Imperial Embers, Canifex, Jimsy, Average Soul, Azu, Jonas, Yellow Rodriguez, Detroit, Motzi, Brina Lee, Jacqueline Lavelle, King Jack, Lifeblood, Reaper Gaming, Mehmet, Kai the Zin, and Zuni. What did you think of this topic? Is the size 2 fish real? Would you like to see more ULTRAKILL? And what would you like me to cover next? Let me know in the comments below. This is where our story ends. Check back soon for a new one.